Well, Don, thanks for joining me, man. We're reaching out to a lot of people that we work with, of course, here at Seaway, and your name keeps coming up. And talking with Jeremy, there's some interesting things about you, but I really wanted to talk about kind of what you guys are doing as a company. And I know we got a chance to talk a little bit, before we jumped on here, and just the idea of textbooks, right? Can you give us some idea of what you guys do there and the perception of and the reality of what a textbook would be?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. What we do is college level textbooks, what the industry is usually referred to as higher education. And a lot of people, when they hear that term, they remember their big intro to accounting or intro to psychology books, or these big monsters that cost them $250 and are full of color pictures and 800 pages long. And that's not really what we do. We're a really small company. And so we found our niche in looking at kind of the upper level courses, the courses that majors have to take. Well, those don't have those big, gigantic books. So a lot of times our books will be smaller format, a 6x9, a 7x9 1/4, maybe around 300 pages, price points around $80 and less. For some subjects, they like, you say anthropology or history or something, they assign a lot of smaller books. And so we're doing a 6x9, maybe 150 pages that we're charging 30 or 40 bucks for, that kind of stuff. There's a real wide range of what kinds of books people are using in the higher ed space. And so we run that whole gamut.
Hmm. It's interesting. I got to ask you, like, how did you get into this? Like, do you ever find yourself like, man, I'm in, I print textbooks. Like, I mean, that's not something like when you're a kid, like, I want to play baseball. I want to be this. And you're like, I'm going to print textbooks. Like, how'd you get into this?
I fell into it.
Yeah.
I was actually in my 20s. I was working on a PhD. I was planning on being a professor, and I was linguistics was my field. So it was a
Yeah.
humanities discipline, not one that you get a lot of money for. And so I needed a way to pay the bills. And my brother told me, well, all you ever do is read. Why don't you go find a job in publishing? And it worked out well. I landed at Waveland. I've been here for 23 years now.
Hmm.
And it turned out to be a great fit. I found that I liked making money. So I decided that this was really the career that spoke to me rather than going on with an academic career.
Interesting, man. So now that you've been in it so long, I'm just always curious. And I mean, I ask myself these questions too, right? But like, now that you've been in it, like, what do you like about it? Like, it's interesting because you guys are a very niche outfit over there, right? Small company, you're putting textbooks. Like, what is it that has kept you there for that long?
Um, More than anything, I said I came from an academic background. And one
Yeah.
of the reasons that I don't think I would have succeeded as an academic is that academics is all about learning everything there is to know about one small subject. And what I get to do with my job now is, because they're textbooks, you're still talking about subjects that a student isn't going to know anything about, right? They're supposed to
Mhm.
learn from reading the book. And so by working on this stuff, I get to learn about a ton of different things, stuff that I never even would have thought was interesting. And then as I'm working on a book, it's like, wow, or even just researching the market for a book. It's like, this is some cool stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really expanded my mind in a lot of ways that way. And I learn a lot with every book we publish.
Man, it's so interesting to have that type of perspective, in such a niche. It's cool, man. Like, it's really interesting. Now, you mentioned to me, like, in terms of choosing the textbooks, like, how do you guys determine like what is a good fit to print and what isn't one to publish? Like, who's making those decisions and how do you make those decisions?
That's a good question. We've got a few very experienced acquisitions editors here,
Mhm.
and the including myself. One of the big things we look at is, if somebody is pitching a book to me, is it written for a particular class?
Hmm.
And if it's not, it's going to be hard to sell. But if it's something that this is a class that a lot of people teach, there's either not very many books out there on the subject, or it comes at the subject from a really different, unique way. That's something that we're going to be interested in. It's got to be something that stands out in the market, even if that market is small.
That's interesting. What do you guys like? So for you, obviously with the supply chain, and there's so many challenges going on right now. Like I would imagine, I mean, you've got to be dealing with obviously educational institutions, right?
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, their demands and expectations. I mean, you're dealing with something when a class is going to start. If you don't have books there, so there's a very little grace there. You know what I mean? Like,
That's Yeah,
so
that's exactly right. I always say we are slaves to the academic schedule. It's we're not looking at release dates for we're going to have a big launch or anything like that. For us, it's we need the books there when the class is starting.
yeah,
And yeah, it's been really challenging over the last year, especially. A lot of our manufacturers just can't get paper. Or they can't get the paper that we need. And so, we've been looking elsewhere, but it's hard. It's really hard making sure that those books are there when we need them. We've had to pull the trigger on reprints earlier than we might otherwise have, which is always a bit of a shot in the dark because you don't want to get stuck with inventory sitting in your warehouse for, an extra year.
yeah.
But at the same time, it's way worse if you don't have those books when that class starts, because then that professor is going to lose faith and switch to a different book next semester. So it's been a huge challenge.
Now, have you dealt with any other? Because I know for us, we've been fortunate, with a lot of our paper supply and some of the stuff that we did in advance. But I mean, have you run into that, like with other printers, where just you order something, it doesn't show up, or they don't have the paper?
Absolutely.
I mean, then how do you deal with that? What do you do?
It's been, thankfully, we've got a pretty good system in place for pulling the trigger when we think inventory is going to hit a certain point, and we try to be pretty proactive. But yeah, it's been the biggest problem has been the manufacturers accepting the work and then not being able to fulfill, or they'll accept the work and then we find out that there's a 16-week schedule where traditionally we've gotten 4 or 5. It's been rough, and a lot of it for us has been navigating it through communication with the professors that use our books, making sure they understand our perspective, where we're coming from. A lot of them, interestingly, have heard about the paper shortages, because it's that big of a deal. But yeah, communication is key, making sure that everybody's aware of where things are, and we can plan accordingly when our manufacturers are communicative with us, our customers, who are fundamentally the professors. They are better able to plan when we're in communication with them. And as long as everybody knows what's going on, it makes things a lot easier. If we've got a book where we know we've got, orders sitting there in a file, I'm going to make sure that I'm in touch with my manufacturer a week beforehand, a few days beforehand. Give me a status update, what's going on.
Yeah.
If we do get surprised, which, happens definitely, again, the biggest thing is communication with the people using it. Hey, what do the kids have to read during that first week that we can't get books to you? Can we supply you with a PDF of just that first chapter to hold you over? You can distribute that to your students, that kind of thing. Making sure that the instructors that are using our books have what they need to teach their class.
I guess, where do you weigh things in terms of the partners that you're choosing? And I always think through that myself too. Like, what makes me keep using people that I'm using when it's a commodity industry? What are those things that are really important to a guy like you?
Well, you can't overestimate price. Price is always going to be there. And really, a lot of it, when it comes to price, though, is making sure that we're working with vendors that are a good fit for what we do. So even though we print books that are all trim sizes, we use a lot of different papers, this and that, there's still a pretty fixed universe of what we're looking at. The vast majority of our print runs are 1,500 or less. We're printing about, I'd say, 90% of our titles on a 50-pound white offset. So we need partners that specialize in that kind of stuff and are able to deliver on that. Sure, occasionally we want something on a thinner sheet, or occasionally we're going to have a 2,000 copy run, but we can, work with that. The big thing is to make sure that our bread and butter is something that fits well. And once we've got that in place, you make sure that you've got somebody that can produce high quality books. They can do it at a good price, and they can do so reliably. We want to make sure that when we're planning that if we need books in 3 weeks, we know that when that manufacturer says we're going to deliver these books in 3 weeks, you're going to have those books in 3 weeks, which, as we just talked about, has been much more challenging over the last year or so. Again, your prices are fantastic. Reliability is huge. Not only do you guys have the fastest turnaround times of anybody I work with, you have had those turnaround times consistently for, we've worked together for 12 years thereabouts at this point. And I've never had unreliable schedules from you. Whenever I get a schedule, I can count on it. Also, the service is phenomenal. I work a lot with Jennifer Wharton as my CSR. She is the best of anybody that I work with. She not only does she know her stuff, she knows just how far she has to push people in the plant to get things for her customers. And the fact that Jennifer has been there throughout my entire tenure of working with Seaway means that she and I have developed a fantastic relationship. She knows just what questions to ask on Waveland jobs. If I submit a job and I mark the PO as having, printing on the interior cover, it's not something we do very often. She'll always check back with me to confirm, hey, did you really want this? That kind of stuff. She really knows Waveland well. She knows me well. She and I even have a joke that whenever we actually have to talk, it means something's gone wrong, because really we've reached a point where things operate seamlessly between us. And you can't put a price on that. She's just great to work with. Jeremy is the same way. He really knows our account. He understands what we're looking for. And I know in working with either Jeremy or Jennifer that when I ask for something that might be a little outside the norm, they really listen, and they're going to do what they can and give me an honest answer as to whether something is, reasonable or not. So yeah, service-wise, you guys are just fantastic, and the quality is consistent. All of that. And as far as what equipment you have and the kind of things you specialize in, it's just a great fit for Waveland. It really matches well what we do.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I appreciate that. What I wanted to ask you, like Jeremy mentioned your linguistics. I mean, is that something you've well, first of all, like I'm a novice at that. That's foreign territory. So when you say linguistics, like are you talking about like you speak multiple languages here?
I do. That's not really what linguistics is.
Right. That's why I was asking.
It's hard. Well, most people that are into linguistics are also polyglots. They also speak multiple languages. What linguistics is really the study of like how language works, really breaking down languages. My specialty when I was working on my PhD was historical linguistics, which is the study of how languages change over time. So I worked on these two small families of native languages in the Arctic was my thing. And looking at the history of those languages and what we can tell from that. But yeah, most people that get into that are into it because they like languages and learning. So yeah, I've learned to speak a few over the years.
That's wild, man. Like I didn't anticipate like going down that rabbit hole with you, but like so what is like what changes? When you're studying that, like what are you looking at, and how, I guess first of all, like what changes? You give me an example of a change, and like what does that do to the culture?
Well, a great example that I give people is if you just look at English and people look at English and they look at the way we speak and they look at the way that the language is written, and you say, is this even the same language? A word like, night is spelled Knight. It doesn't make any sense. But if you look at when English writing was being standardized. You're talking about before Shakespeare, so 900s or so. Well, what we know is that English actually sounded a lot more like how it's written.
Hmm.
And a lot of the weirdness in English spelling and English writing is because it was really being used for a language that sounded radically different from the English that we know now. So we can see that, we know that language changes. We know that a word like night was originally pronounced knicht, which makes
Hmm.
perfect sense if you look at how it's spelled. So yeah, it's that kind of stuff that's fascinating. And you can look at even, the languages I studied don't really have written traditions. They were just spoken languages, but you can look at languages that are kind of related and sound like each other, and you look at the differences between them, and that can tell you stuff about whether, they were related and what they might have sounded like in the past and that kind of stuff. About 3 years ago, visited Japan for the first time, and it was the first
Oh,
time I
wow.
got to speak Japanese in the wild, which was fantastic. It took a little while for it to get primed back, but it was still in there. Um, so yeah, I haven't, and I use my Spanish. We've been to Costa Rica a few times, so yeah, I'm not really widely traveled. It's mostly kind of just learning on my own. Whenever I encounter anybody who might speak another language, I always try to lead with that just to get a little bit of practice in here and there.
Yeah, that's wild. Wow, what a fascinating thing. I mean, it's so interesting. Yeah, like things that are so outside of my comfort level or my knowledge.
Mhm.
I'm always like, I run into someone who is dialed in to something like you are. It is really interesting, like the paths we take on
Yes,
on this
exactly.
crazy ride, this crazy ride we call life. It's like it's just so interesting, like the path that everyone takes. When I talk to someone like you, it's just super interesting, man. I don't know. It's very, very cool. Well,
Yeah.
Don, thanks for joining me, man. It's crazy, kind of learning more about you. I mean, you're a fascinating guy, and it's interesting that you're in the space that you're in. I love that you approach the work with such a level of curiosity.
Yeah. It's I think it's important for anybody that's in this line of work. You have to really like the content that you're publishing and feel passionate about it. So I'm pretty grateful that I'm in this space. I get to, even though if I didn't end up as an academic, I still get to be part of that world. It's a great, very grateful for it.
Dude, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you kind of sharing some insight with us, and we love working with you guys, and look forward to a lot more work and a lot more opportunities to come, man. So I appreciate you very much, and yeah, man, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity, Steve. Take care.